She didn't follow him to the house on the hill because she was jealous. She followed him because 3 days ago, a blood test confirmed what the nausea and the missed cycles had already whispered. She was carrying Tavian Corva's child. But when she pressed her face to the rain-streaked glass of that unfamiliar cottage and saw him, the most feared man on the eastern seaboard, kneeling on a bare wooden floor beside another pregnant woman, cradling her swollen belly with both hands, whispering words Karis couldn't hear, it calcified. She walked back to the car, locked the doors, and started planning how to vanish. What she didn't know was that disappearing would have gotten all three of them killed. The morning light in the penthouse was engineered, not natural. It filtered through automated blinds, calibrated to mimic a slow Mediterranean sunrise, casting a warm amber glow across the open-plan living space that occupied the entire 43rd floor of the Corva Tower in downtown Ravenmore. Everything in the apartment was deliberate. The concrete countertops were hand-poured by an artisan in Bruges. The bookshelves were stocked with first editions Tavian had never read, selected by a decorator whose invoice ran longer than most people's mortgages. It was a showroom, a mausoleum, dressed in minimalist luxury. Karis Holmes stood barefoot on the heated marble floor of the kitchen, stirring a cup of ginger tea she didn't want. She was 9 weeks pregnant, though only she and a private clinic in the Berkshires knew that. The nausea came in rolling, unpredictable waves, and she had become an expert at masking it. A sip of ginger tea, a pressed smile, a controlled exhale through the nose. She had been with Tavian for 2 years, not publicly. The Corva Syndicate didn't do public. She existed in the carefully curated gap between his professional empire and his private silence. She attended no galas. Her name appeared on no deeds. She was listed in his phone under the letter K, not because of her surname, but because he had once told her, in a rare moment of unguarded honesty, that she was the key to the only room in his mind that wasn't filled with violence. It was the closest Tavian Corva had ever come to saying he loved someone. Tavian himself was already gone. His side of the bed had been cold when she woke at 5:30, the sheets pulled tight with military precision. The only evidence of his presence was the faint residue of his cologne, something sharp and woody, like cedar bark split open by a blade, and a single espresso cup rinsed and placed upside down on the drying rack. He controlled everything, even the way he exited a room. Karis pressed her hand against her lower abdomen, a gesture that had become instinctive over the past week. She hadn't told him. She kept rehearsing the words, watching his imagined reaction from every angle, like a chess player studying a board. Tavian didn't do surprise well. Surprise meant a variable he hadn't accounted for. In his world, unaccounted variables got people buried in the foundations of parking garages. But this wasn't a variable, this was a heartbeat, a second pulse living inside her ribs. And she needed to tell him soon, because her body was already beginning to betray the secret. Her sense of smell had sharpened to an almost unbearable degree. Yesterday she had caught the scent of Tavian's gun oil from 2 rooms away, the metallic tan cutting through the walls like a warning. She took a sip of the ginger tea. It tasted like lukewarm dirt. Tonight, she decided. She would tell him tonight. He didn't come home that night. At 9:47 p.m., her phone lit up with a single text from his encrypted line. 2 words, running late, no context, no apology, no estimated time. Karis stared at the screen until it went dark, her reflection staring back at her from the black glass. Tavian was meticulous about his schedule. He ran his empire, the way a surgeon runs an operating theater, every minute assigned, every person accounted for. In 2 years, he had canceled on her exactly once, and that was the night one of his cargo ships was seized by federal agents in the harbor. He had called her from a rooftop, breathing hard, and told her not to open the door for anyone until she heard his voice. This was different. This was silence. She called him at 1:1. No answer. She called again at midnight. The line rang once and cut to voicemail. At 1:15 a.m., she heard the front door open and close with a careful, deliberate softness. She was sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, her hands resting on her knees. Tavian appeared in the doorway. He didn't turn on the light. She could only make out his silhouette. Tall, broad through the shoulders, slightly tilted to the left. The way he stood when his mind was carrying something heavy. "You're awake," he said, not a question. "Where were you?" "Business." The word landed flat, like a door closing. She waited for more. He offered nothing. He walked past her into the ensuite, and she heard the faucet run. When he came back, he smelled different, not like his cologne. Not like smoke or whiskey. He smelled like chamomile and something soft, something floral, like a woman's soap. Karis's stomach dropped, not from the nausea. "Tavian?" "Go to sleep, Karis." His voice carried a strange, frayed edge she had never heard before. Not anger, not coldness, something closer to guilt. He climbed into bed, turning his back to her. Within minutes, his breathing slowed to the deep, measured rhythm of a man trained to sleep anywhere, anytime. Karis lay beside him in the dark, wide awake, her hand pressed against the tiny life growing inside her, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt completely and terrifyingly alone. The chamomile scent lingered on the sheets like a fingerprint. The next 3 days were a masterclass in controlled erosion. Tavian left early, returned late. The pattern was surgical in its consistency, gone by 5 a.m. Back after midnight, each time he came home, the chamomile scent clung to him like a second skin, faint but unmistakable, woven into the fibers of his collar. He kissed her forehead when he climbed into bed, a mechanical gesture, a stamp on an envelope he had already sealed. Karis didn't confront him. She had grown up in the harbor district of Ravenmoor, the youngest daughter of a dock worker who drank his paychecks, and a mother who kept a packed suitcase under the bed for 17 years but never left. She had learned early that accusations without proof were just noise, and noise got you ignored. You watched, you gathered, then you moved. On the third morning, she found a receipt crumpled in the pocket of his charcoal overcoat. While he was in the shower, she hadn't been looking for it. She had been reaching for his car keys to move his Escalade out of her parking spot. The receipt was from a pharmacy in Sableford, a small fishing village 40 minutes north of the city. Prenatal vitamins, folic acid supplements, iron tablets, a hot water bottle. Karis held the thin paper between her fingers, reading the items twice. 3 times her pulse throbbed in her wrists. She hadn't told him about her pregnancy, yet. He wasn't buying these for her, he was buying them for someone else. A pregnant someone else. She slipped the receipt into the back pocket of her jeans, pressing it flat against the denim. She took a long shower, standing motionless under the spray until it turned cold, cataloging her options the way Tavian cataloged his shipping routes. Methodical, unemotional. Option 1. Ask him directly. Risk getting a polished lie and losing the element of surprise. Option 2. Call his head of security, a granite-faced Serb named Bruce, who had once snapped a man's wrist for reaching across Tavian's dinner plate. Bruce would tell Tavian she was asking questions within the hour. Option 3. Follow the receipt. Karis turned off the water. She dressed in dark jeans and a loose black sweater that concealed the barely there swell of her lower belly, and pulled up the pharmacy's address on her phone. Sableford. She had never been there. She had never even heard Tavian mention it. She grabbed the keys to her own car, a modest silver hatchback Tavian had quietly disapproved of, and walked out of the penthouse. She didn't leave a note. If he noticed she was gone, he would call. If he didn't notice, that would tell her everything she needed to know. The elevator doors closed, and the woman staring back at her in the polished steel reflection looked like someone she barely recognized. Harder, older, already grieving something she hadn't confirmed yet. The highway north, out of Ravenmoor, shed its polish, like a snake shedding skin. The first 20 minutes were familiar: the mirrored towers of the financial district, the curated waterfront promenade, the sleek concrete overpass that carried commuter traffic above the harbor where Tavian's cargo ships sat like sleeping giants. Karis had driven this stretch 100 times, always heading back toward the city, always returning to the polished cage on the 43rd floor. Today, she was driving away from it, past the overpass. The road narrowed. The manicured median strip disappeared, replaced by cracked asphalt and a rusted guardrail, strip malls with half-lit signs, a boarded-up gas station with weeds pushing through the forecourt, a roadside motel advertising rooms by the hour in bleeding red neon, even though it was broad daylight. Karis gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles blanching. The ginger tea she had forced down that morning was threatening to make a reappearance. She cracked the window an inch. The air outside smelled of wet earth, diesel fumes, and the faintly briny edge of the coast. She thought about the first time she met Tavian. She had been waitressing at a private supper club in Raven Moore's old quarter, a place where the silverware was heavier than the conversation and the clientele paid in cash. Tavian had been sitting alone at a corner table, reading a water-stained paperback with the focus of a man defusing a bomb, when a drunk patron had grabbed her wrist as she passed, hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises. Tavian hadn't raised his voice. He had simply looked at the man. Just looked. The drunk released her wrist, settled his tab, and never came back. Tavian had waited until her shift ended, handed her a card with only a phone number, and said, "If he comes back, call that number before you call the police. The police will file a report. I'll make sure he never touches anyone again." She hadn't called for 3 months. When she finally did, it wasn't because the drunk came back. It was because she couldn't stop thinking about the man who read paperbacks in the dark and made threats that sounded like promises. Now she was driving into the unknown, carrying his child and a pharmacy receipt, trying to reconcile the man who had offered her his protection with the man who smelled like another woman's soap. The GPS directed her off the highway at a crooked exit ramp. The road twisted through dense pine forest, the trees pressing in from both sides, like a corridor narrowing toward something inevitable. Stableford itself was barely a town. A single main street, lined with faded clapboard buildings, a bait and tackle shop, a post office, the size of a garden shed, a pharmacy with a hand-painted sign and a ginger cat sleeping on the front step. The kind of place where a black Escalade with city plates would be remembered for a month. Karis parked outside the pharmacy. She pulled the receipt from her back pocket and read the address printed at the top, 14 Harrow Lane. She typed it into her phone. 1.5 miles north, up a gravel road that dead-ended at the coast. She sat in the car for a full 3 minutes. A seagull landed on the hood and stared at her through the windshield with flat, judgmental eyes. "I know," she muttered. She started the car and turned north. The gravel crunched beneath her tires like grinding tea. The cottage at 14 Harrow Lane sat at the edge of a bluff overlooking a gray, churning stretch of Atlantic coastline. It was small, built from weathered stone and dark timber, with a sloping roof covered in moss. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney, a vegetable garden wrapped around one side, the beds neat and recently turned. There was a wooden bench by the front door, and on it, a pair of muddy boots she recognized instantly. Tavian's boots. The hand-stitched Italian leather ones with the reinforced soles that he wore when he didn't want to be Tavian Corva, crime lord, when he wanted to feel like a man who did simple things with his hands. His Escalade was parked on the grass behind a low stone wall, half hidden by a sprawling hydrangea bush. He had tried to conceal it. That detail hurt more than the boots. Karis left her car at the bottom of the gravel drive and walked up on foot. Her legs felt detached from her body, moving on autopilot, while her mind ran calculations she didn't want to finish. The wind off the ocean was sharp, carrying salt, and the metallic smell of an incoming storm. She approached the cottage from the side, staying below the sightline of the front windows. The vegetable garden smelled of wet soil and crushed thyme. She could hear something from inside, not conversation. Music, a slow, aching cello piece that sounded like it belonged in a cathedral. She reached the side window. The glass was old, warped slightly, framed by peeling white paint. A lace curtain hung behind it, sheer enough to see through. Karis looked inside, and the world she had built, carefully, quietly, brick by brick, over 2 years of loving a man who lived in shadow, came apart at the foundations. The room was a small sitting area, simply furnished. A wood-burning stove, a threadbare rug, a rocking chair, and in the center, on a low cushioned bench, sat a woman. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair pulled into a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. Her face was round and pale, her cheeks flushed pink from the warmth of the stove. She was visibly, heavily pregnant, 7 months at least, maybe 8. Her hands rested on the high dome of her belly, fingers splayed wide. And Tavian was kneeling on the bare wooden floor in front of her. His jacket was off. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. His large, scarred hands were resting on either side of the woman's belly, palms flat, fingers spread. His head was bowed slightly, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. The firelight played across the sharp planes of his face, softening them. He looked gentle. He looked reverent. He looked like a man in love. The woman said something Karis couldn't hear through the glass. Tavian looked up at her and smiled, not the controlled, calculated half-smile he used in meetings or the razor-thin smirk he wore when closing a deal, a real smile. Open, warm, and achingly tender. He reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind the woman's ear, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Karis stopped breathing. The ginger tea and bile rose simultaneously. She pressed her fist against her mouth, her vision blurring. Everything she had feared but refused to name crystallized into a single, suffocating frame. Another woman. Another baby. Further along than her. Hidden in a cottage at the edge of the world where no one from Ravenmoor would ever think to look. This wasn't a fling. This was a life. A parallel life he had built in the gaps between coming home to her and kissing her forehead in the dark. She backed away from the window, her heel caught the edge of a garden bed, and she stumbled. A terracotta pot tipped off the ledge and shattered against the flagstones with a sharp, brittle crack. Inside, the cello music stopped. Karis ran. She just turned and moved down the gravel drive with a speed that sent a sharp, pulling ache through her lower abdomen. She reached her car, fumbled the keys with shaking hands, and dropped into the driver's seat. She locked the doors. In the rearview mirror, through the blur of tears and rain beginning to streak the back window, she saw the front door of the cottage open. A figure stepped out onto the porch. She didn't wait to see if it was him. She reversed down the gravel road, swung the car onto the main lane, and drove south toward Ravenmoor, her hands trembling on the wheel, the receipt still folded in her pocket like a paper grenade, with the pin already pulled. She didn't cry. Crying was for women who had the luxury of surprise. Karis Holm had spent her whole life expecting to be left behind. She just hadn't expected it to happen before she even got the chance to say the words. "I'm carrying your child." The sentence sat unspoken in her chest like a stone. Karis drove the 40 minutes back to Ravenmoor in a state of hollow, mechanical calm. The kind of calm that comes after the detonation, when the shockwave has already passed through your body and left everything ringing in white. She parked in her designated spot in the underground garage of Corba Tower, turned off the engine, and sat in the ticking silence for 6 full minutes. Then she went upstairs and started packing. She didn't take much. A leather duffel bag. Clothes, practical, dark, layered. Her passport from the fireproof safe in the study, the combination of which Tavian had given her on their 6th month, together with the instruction, "If I ever don't come home by sunrise, take this and get on the first flight to Reykjavik. There's an account in your name at Landsbanken. Don't call anyone." She left the diamond earrings he had given her on the bathroom counter, lined up on a folded square of tissue like 2 glittering accusations. She was zipping the bag when she heard the front door open, not the careful, measured entry she had grown accustomed to. This was fast, urgent, heavy footsteps crossing the marble foyer. Then his voice. tight and strained, calling her name. Karis. She didn't answer. She hoisted the bag onto her shoulder. He appeared in the bedroom doorway. His hair was wind-wrecked, his chest rising and falling like he had sprinted from the elevator. His eyes dropped to the duffel bag, then to the bare bathroom counter visible through the open ensuite door. The earrings. The empty hook where her robe usually hung. "Put the bag down," he said. Not a command. A request wrapped in barely controlled panic. "Move," Karis replied. Her voice was steady, but thin, like a wire pulled taut. "Karis, whatever you think you saw, I think I saw you kneeling in front of a pregnant woman in a cottage you've been hiding from me, touching her belly like she was carrying the second coming. I think I saw you smile at her, the way you have never once smiled at me. In 2 years." Her voice didn't crack. She wouldn't give him that. "I think I saw everything I needed to see. Now move." Tavian didn't move. He stood in the doorframe, filling it. His hands braced against the wood on either side. His jaw worked. The muscle beneath his left eye twitched. A tell she had learned meant he was fighting an internal war between control and confession. "Her name is Marat," he said. "Marat Cernik." Karis stared at him. The name meant nothing to her. "3 months ago," Tavian continued, his voice dropping to the low graveled register he used when recounting things that cost him something, "I sent a man named Doran Vasic to intercept a data shipment coming through the northern ports. Evidence that the Agar Syndicate has been laundering money through children's charities and funneling it into arms deals in the Balkans." He paused. His throat moved. "Dorn was the best operative I ever trained. Quiet, disciplined. He got the files, encrypted drives, physical ledgers, banking correspondence, enough to bring Oscar Agar's entire empire down. But the extraction went wrong. Agar's men were waiting at the secondary route. Doran was ambushed, badly wounded, and still managed to get the drives to a dead drop before he collapsed on the side of the highway. He didn't make it out." Karis felt the weight of the duffel bag pulling on her shoulder. She didn't lower it. "Doran had a partner," Tavian said. "Maret. She was 5 months pregnant when I knocked on her door and told her the father of her child died protecting my operation. She had no money, no family, no documents. She's undocumented. Karis. If she surfaces, if she walks into a hospital, the Agar family will find her, and she will disappear, Karis. Permanently, because Doran told her where the dead drop is. She's the only person alive who can lead them to the evidence." The room was silent except for the hum of the automated blinds. "I made Doran a promise," Tavian said, his eyes fixed on hers. "The night before the intercept. He asked me, if anything happened, to take care of her, to take care of them." He let his hands drop from the doorframe. "That cottage is a safe house. I bought it under a shell company that doesn't trace back to any Corva asset. I have been lying to you for 3 months, and I will carry that failure for the rest of my life, but I have not touched her. I have never touched her. She is not mine. She is Doran's. And I owe him a debt I can't ever repay." Karis stood perfectly still. The duffel bag strap was cutting into her shoulder. She searched his face for the lie. She looked for the micro-expressions she had catalogued over 2 years. The slight flare of his nostrils when he was bluffing at poker. The half-second delay in eye contact when he was omitting details from a phone call with Bruce. She found nothing. His face was stripped open, raw and entirely undefended. It was the most terrifying version of Tavian she had ever seen. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I know you let me think." Her voice finally cracked. "You let me believe I wasn't enough." Tavian crossed the room in 2 strides. He took the duffel bag off her shoulder, dropping it to the floor. He cupped her face with both hands, tilting her head up so she couldn't look anywhere but at him. "You are the only thing in my life that is not a transaction," he said. His voice was barely audible, rough as unfinished wood. "Everything else I own I took. You, I was given. And I have been destroying it by trying to carry everything alone." A single tear slipped down her cheek and ran into the crease of his thumb. She had something to tell him too. But not like this. Not in the wreckage of a fight. She needed him steady for what was coming next. "We need to sit down," Karis said quietly. "There's something you don't know either." They sat on the edge of the bed. The same bed he had been slipping into at 1 a.m. smelling of chamomile and guilt. The same bed where she had lain awake, counting his breaths, measuring the growing distance between them in the silence. Karis didn't ease into it. She looked at Tavian's hands resting on his knees, the scarred knuckles and the faint tremor he thought she never noticed, and said it plainly, "I'm pregnant. 9 weeks." The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense, pressurized, like the air inside a sealed chamber. Tavian didn't move. He didn't blink, but the color drained from his face in a slow, visible tide, as though someone had pulled a plug somewhere behind his ribs. "Say that again," he whispered. "You heard me." He turned to face her, his movements careful, almost reverent. His eyes dropped to her midsection. The loose black sweater hid everything. But now that he was looking, really looking, he saw it. The way she had been resting her hand against her belly. The ginger tea every morning. The way she had started sleeping on her left side. 9 weeks, he repeated, his voice rough and fractured. "I was going to tell you the night you didn't come home." The first night, the weight of that sentence hit him visibly. She saw it land behind his eyes, the sickening arithmetic, 3 days of chamomile-scented silence, while she carried his child and believed he was giving that tenderness to someone else. "Karis, don't apologize yet," she cut him off. "We have a bigger problem." She reached into her back pocket and pulled out the pharmacy receipt. She unfolded it on the bed between them. Tavian looked at it, recognition flashing across his face. "I found this in your coat 3 days ago. I used the address to drive to Sableford this morning. I found the cottage." She paused. "If I found it." Tavian, a woman with no training, no resources, and a $5 pharmacy receipt. How long before the Agar family finds it? The question detonated in the space between them. Tavian stood up. The shift was instantaneous. The vulnerable man on the edge of the bed was gone, replaced by the operative, the strategist, the predator. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed. "Bruce, mobilize a 2-car detail to the Sableford safe house. Now, not tomorrow, right now." His voice was ice. "The location may be compromised. I want Murray packed and ready to move within the hour. I'm driving up, personally." He hung up and looked at Karis. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness. He was past softness now. It was recognition. She had just done in 3 days what his entire security infrastructure had failed to do. She had found the hole in his armor by following a crumpled receipt and her own instinct. "You're coming with me," Tavian said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't a command either. It sat somewhere in between in a register that sounded dangerously like partnership. "I was already putting my shoes on," Karis replied. She pulled the duffel bag off the floor and began repacking it with different intent. Not to run, to move. The earrings stayed on the bathroom counter. She didn't need diamonds where they were going. The black Escalade carved through the darkening highway, like a blade through wet paper. Tavian drove. He never let anyone drive when the stakes were existential. Breeze occupied the passenger seat, his enormous frame folded awkwardly, a matte black shotgun resting vertically between his knees. Breeze communicated in nods, grunts, and the occasional monosyllabic confirmation. In 2 years, Karis had heard him speak perhaps 40 words. 20 of them were understood. Karis sat in the back seat, her duffel bag at her feet. The nausea was back-rolling in steady waves that she timed against the passing highway markers. She breathed through it. She had been breathing through things her entire life. "How much does Marat know?" Karis asked, breaking the silence 20 minutes into the drive. Tavian's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "She knows Doran is dead. She knows the Agar family wants what he took. She knows I'm keeping her hidden." "Does she know what's on the drives?" No, and she doesn't need to. She needs to know something. Tavian. You've got a woman 8 months pregnant, living in isolation, with no phone, no car, and no understanding of exactly how much danger she's actually in. That's not protection. That's a cage, with a better view. Briz made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Tavian's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She's alive, Tavian said flatly. She's alive and terrified and alone. There's a difference between surviving and being safe. Tavian was quiet for a long stretch, the kind of silence that meant he was recalculating, adjusting his internal map to accommodate a variable he hadn't anticipated, Karis being right. When we arrive, Karis continued, let me talk to her first. If she sees you walk in with Bruce and a shotgun telling her to pack immediately, she will panic. A woman that far along does not need the adrenaline spike. She knows Bruce. He's been her supply run contact. She knows Briss as the man who drops groceries on her porch once a week. She doesn't know him as the man carrying a tactical weapon into her living room at 10 o'clock at night. Another long silence. Then Tavian exhaled through his nose, a sharp, reluctant concession. Fine. You go in first. 5 minutes. Then we move. Karis nodded, but she wasn't finished. One more thing. When this is over, when Marat is moved, when the drives are secured, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about how you make decisions that affect my life without telling me. Because you have been treating me like something to protect, Tavian, not someone to trust. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Briss stared resolutely out the passenger window. Tavian said nothing, but his knuckles loosened, just slightly, on the wheel. They reached Sableford at 10:15. The town was dead. Tavian killed the headlights a half-mile from Harrow Lane and drove the rest by moonlight and muscle memory. The cottage was dark. No chimney smoke. Bruce swept the perimeter in under 90 seconds, reappearing at the driver's window with a single nod. Claire Karis climbed out into the night air. The wind off the ocean was vicious, cutting through her sweater. She could taste salt on her lips. She walked up the gravel path alone. She knocked on the front door. 3 soft, deliberate knocks. Then, a voice from inside. Thin and raw with fear. Who is it? My name is Karis. I'm with Tavian. He's outside. He sent me in first because he thought a woman's voice might scare you less than a man with a gun. She paused. He was probably right, but I want you to know it was my idea. Another pause, then the scrape of a heavy deadbolt. The door opened 3 inches, a brass chain still engaged. A single dark eye peered through the gap, young, frightened, ringed with the purple shadow of chronic sleeplessness. He told me about you once, Marat said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said you were the only honest thing he owned. Karis felt the words land somewhere beneath her sternum, in the space where the anger had been living. It didn't disappear, but it shifted, made room for something else. I'm not a thing, Karis said gently. Can I come in? The chain slid free. The cottage was warm inside, but stripped bare of any comfort that wasn't functional. The rocking chair had been pushed against the front door as a makeshift barricade. Marat stood by the kitchen counter, one hand braced on the surface, the other cradling the underside of her belly. She was smaller than Karis had expected, her frame narrow, overwhelmed by the sheer physical presence of the pregnancy. Her dark auburn braid was messy, loose strands framing a face that was beautiful in the way of things that have been weathered too long. But her eyes were sharp, alert, and deeply distrustful. Has something happened? Marat asked, watching Karis with the guarded stillness of a trapped animal. We need to move you tonight. Tavian believes this location may have been found. Marat's hand tightened on the counter. Karis could see the panic start to climb up her chest, tensing her shoulders, thinning her lips. Hey, Karis said, stepping closer, keeping her voice low and even. Look at me, not the door. Me. Marat's eyes locked onto hers. I'm 9 weeks pregnant, Karis told her. I found out 4 days ago. I haven't even had my first scan yet. so I need you to understand that when I tell you, I will make sure you and your baby are safe tonight. I am speaking as someone who has a very personal stake in how this goes. Marate stared at her. Her lower lip trembled, and for a moment Karis thought she would cry. She didn't. She pressed her lips together, inhaled sharply through her nose, and nodded once. What do I need? To bring anything you can't replace, leave the rest. Marate turned and walked into the back room. Karis exhaled, pressing her hand against her stomach. The nausea was gone. In its place was a clarity, so sharp it almost hurt. She stepped to the front door and opened it. Tavian stood 3 paces back, his hands at his sides, waiting. She's packing, Karis said. Give her 2 minutes. Tavian looked at her. The wind moved between them, carrying salt and pine resin. You told her, he said quietly. About the pregnancy. She needed to trust me. The truth was the fastest way. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not surprise, recognition. Like a man watching a key turn in a lock he had believed was permanently sealed. 2 minutes, he repeated, and stepped back into the dark. They didn't get 2 minutes. Bruce appeared at the corner of the cottage, moving fast, his shotgun leveled at the tree line. He raised one closed fist. Contact. 3 vehicles, Bruce said, his voice barely above a breath. Coming up the coast road, no headlights, running dark. Tavian's entire body shifted. The concerned partner, the guilty lover, all of it vanished. What replaced it was something Karis had only glimpsed in fragments. The version of Tavian that other men had nightmares about. How far? Tavian asked, already moving toward the Escalade. 4 minutes, maybe less. Then we have 3 minutes. Tavian popped the rear hatch and pulled out a black nylon bag. He armed himself and Bruce in under 30 seconds, moving with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had done this 100 times. Bruce accepted the weapon, with the same emotional investment a carpenter might give to receiving a hammer. Karis stood in the doorway of the cottage. Her pulse hammered in her ears, but her voice was level. How did they find us? Doesn't matter right now, Tavian said. It matters if there's a leak in your... Karis. He looked at her. The look carried the weight of everything he couldn't say in the next 180 seconds. Take Murat out the back. There's a footpath through the garden that leads down to the beach. Follow the rocks south for a 1/4 mile. You'll hit a service road, gray van. Keys under the front wheel. Well, you planned an extraction route. I plan an extraction route for every safe house I've ever built. He crossed the gravel and stopped directly in front of her. He pressed his lips against her forehead, hard, brief, and almost bruising. Go, now. Don't stop until you reach the van. He turned away before she could respond. Karis didn't argue. She turned into the cottage, grabbed Murat by the arm, and pulled her toward the back door. Murat was clutching a small canvas bag to her chest, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that lives deeper than adrenaline. We're going out the back, Karis said, her voice calm and absolutely certain. There's a path down to the beach. Can you walk? The baby's sitting on my pelvis. Murat gasped. Walking is a strong word. Then we'll call it an aggressive waddle. Move. They slipped out the back door as the first set of tires crunched onto the far end of the gravel drive. The garden was dark. Karis found the footpath by feel, the ground shifting from soft earth to packed sand to loose rock, as the bluff sloped sharply toward the shoreline. Mireille moved with agonizing slowness, one hand gripping Karis's arm, the other pressed against her lower back. Her breathing was ragged, each exhale carrying a thin whimper she was trying desperately to suppress. Behind them, up at the cottage, a sharp crack shattered the silence, then another, then a rapid overlapping series of them that echoed off the bluff and rolled out over the water like distant thunder. Murat flinched violently. Oh God, don't listen, just walk, eyes on me. They reached the beach. The rocks were slick with spray, jagged and uneven. The tide was halfway in, waves smashing against the stones with relentless violence. Karis moved south along the waterline, guiding Mairead over the worst of the terrain, bracing her weight when she stumbled. Above them, the sounds of the confrontation continued. Then a heavy, concussive boom vibrated through the rock beneath their feet. Tavian, Karis breathed, the name escaping before she could stop it. Keep going, Mairead whispered fiercely, surprising her. The younger woman's face was streaked with tears and salt spray, but her voice had hardened. Doran used to say, "The ones who survive are the ones who don't stop moving." Karis looked at her. In the fractured moonlight, Mairead Chernik didn't look like a victim. She looked like a woman who had already lost the man she loved and refused to let his child be taken from her too. They moved. The quarter-mile felt like a marathon. Mairead was gasping, but she kept going, one hand on her belly and one hand on Karis's shoulder. The service road appeared like a hallucination, a strip of cracked tarmac cutting through the dune grass. The gray van sat exactly where Tavian said it would be. Karis dropped to her knees and found the key fob under the wheel. Well, she helped Mairead into the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. The engine caught on the first try. "Where do I go?" Karis asked, gripping the wheel with hands that were shaking for the first time all night. "South," Mairead panted. "He told me, if it ever went bad, drive south to Ravenmore, the tower garage, level B3. There's a secured apartment behind the maintenance corridor. Entry code is Doran's birthday, 1809. Karis stared at her. "He gave you the code to a safe room in his own building." Mairead opened her eyes. "He gave me the code the same day he gave me his word." Karis put the van in gear. She drove south along the coast road, the headlights cutting through salt fog. In the rearview mirror, the sky above the bluff flickered orange. Something at the cottage was burning. 40 minutes later, her phone buzzed. She fumbled it out and hit accept. "Where are you?" Tavian's voice. "Alive." "Winded?" 20 minutes from the tower. "Mairead is with me. She's okay." She could hear him breathing. Heavy. Controlled. "The Agard team has been dealt with. All 7. They won't be coming back. And you?" "Still here." Another pause. Longer. "Karis." "What?" "You got her out." "I got us out." The line was quiet for 3 heartbeats. Then so softly she almost missed it beneath the engine noise. "Both of you. All 3 of you." He had counted the baby. Her baby. Their baby. "Come home, Tavian," Karis said, and hung up before her voice could betray her. The safe room behind level B3 was not what Karis expected. She had pictured a bunker. Instead, the steel door opened onto a small but fully furnished apartment. Warm lighting. A kitchenette stocked with canned food and bottled water. 2 beds, both made with clean white sheets. A first aid cabinet better stocked than most pharmacies. She was asleep within seconds, her canvas bag clutched to her chest. Karis stood over her for a moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her belly, counting the rhythm until she was sure it was stable. Then she sat down on the edge of the double bed, put her face in her hands, and let the trembling finally take over. It came in waves. Her shoulders first, then her arms, then her entire torso, shaking with a violence that had nothing to do with cold, and everything to do with the last 6 hours catching up to her body. The gravel path, the chaos at the cottage, the rocks. The baby, her baby, that she had carried through all of it without once letting herself think about what could have gone wrong. She pressed her hands against her abdomen. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she didn't know if she was apologizing to the life inside her or to herself. She didn't hear Tavian arrive. She just became aware of him. A shift in the air pressure, the faint scent of smoke and sweat. She looked up. He stood in the doorway. His shirt was torn at the left shoulder, a strip of dark fabric tied around his upper arm, a field dressing, hastily applied. His face was streaked with grime and something darker. His eyes found Mairead first, confirming she was breathing, then found Karis. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, not the way he had knelt in front of Mairead at the cottage. This was different. This was a man lowering himself before the woman he had almost lost, putting himself below her eyeline, making himself smaller so she could feel the full weight of what he was offering. He took her hands. They were freezing. His were warm despite everything, broad and rough and steady. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No. The baby. I don't know. I think, I think we're okay." His forehead dropped against their joined hands. He stayed there, breathing, his shoulders rigid with the effort of not breaking apart. Karis felt the dampness on her knuckles and realized with a sharp, aching shock that Tavian Corvo was crying, not sobbing, not shaking. Just a slow, silent leak of something he had been holding behind a dam. For years, the tears ran down the backs of her hands and collected in the creases between their interlocked fingers. They stayed like that for a long moment. Then Karis turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his, and guided his palm against her belly. The gesture was small, but the weight of it filled the room. Tavian went completely still. His hand stayed where she placed it, his fingers spanning her lower abdomen. There was nothing to feel yet. 9 weeks was too early. But he kept his hand there, motionless, as though he could will the heartbeat into his palm through sheer focus. "I was going to tell you that first night," Karis said. "The night you didn't come home. I had the whole thing planned. I was going to make your terrible espresso and sit you down and tell you that the most dangerous man in Ravenmoor was going to be a father." Tavian let out a sound, not a laugh, something rougher, broken in the middle. "I would have been terrified. You should be. You don't even know how to hold a baby." I held Moraes supply boxes. They're roughly the same weight. Karis looked at him, kneeling on the floor of a hidden bunker beneath his own tower, battered and bruised, tear tracks cutting through the grime on his face, his hand resting on the place where his child was growing, and felt something rearrange itself permanently inside her chest. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness implied a debt had been settled. This was something raw, an understanding that the man in front of her was irreparably flawed, fundamentally dangerous, and utterly incapable of doing this without her. "You're never buying prenatal vitamins for anyone but me again," she said. "And next time you build a safe house, I want to know the address." Noted. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. They stayed like that, breathing the same air, his hand on her belly, her hands on his jaw, in a reinforced room beneath 43 floors of glass and steel, while a woman, carrying a dead man's child, slept 5 feet away. It was the ugliest, most beautiful moment of Karis Holmes' life. The morning came in shades of gray, not the engineered amber of the penthouse blinds, real light, leaking through the ventilation grate of the safe room. Karis woke on the double bed, fully clothed, a thin blanket pulled over her shoulders that she didn't remember reaching for. Tavian was gone from beside her, but not far. She could hear his voice through the half-open door of the kitchenette, low and even, carrying the particular cadence he used when he was establishing facts, not requesting them. Moret was awake on the single bed, eating a granola bar with the slow, mechanical focus of someone fueling a body rather than enjoying a meal. "He's been on the phone since 5, Moret said quietly. 3 different numbers. Karis walked to the kitchenette doorway. Tavian was leaning against the counter, a burner phone pressed to his ear, a cup of black coffee steaming beside his elbow. He had showered, his dark hair was damp, pushed back from his forehead, and he wore a clean gray shirt from the safe room closet. The field dressing on his arm had been replaced with a proper bandage, stark white against his skin. He saw her and held up one finger. "Wait, let me be very clear. Oscar?" Tavian said into the phone. His voice was smooth, unhurried, carrying the terrifying politeness of a man who had already won and was simply informing the loser. 7 of your men drove to a location that doesn't exist on any map. They are not coming home. Their vehicles have been disposed of. Your people have vanished, Oscar. I was more thorough than your organization has ever been." Karis leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. "The encrypted drives are now in my possession. Every transaction, every shell company, and every charity you've been gutting. I have the complete architecture of your financial network. A tinny, furious voice crackled through the speaker. Tavian took a slow sip of his coffee. You have two options, Oscar. Option 1. You close your operations east of the river. Pull every asset, every soldier out of my territory by sundown. The drives stay in my vault as insurance. Option 2. You come for me again, and I release everything publicly, every newspaper. Your donors named, your political contacts burned. You won't go to prison, Oscar. You'll go somewhere much worse. You'll become irrelevant. Silence on the line. A long, grinding, humiliating silence. Sundown, Tavian repeated. And Oscar, the woman carrying Doran Vasik's child. If I ever hear her name in your mouth, I will not negotiate again. I will simply arrive. He ended the call and set the phone face down on the counter. Karis looked at him. Christmas present. I've been told my gift-giving needs improvement, she almost smiled. Almost. What about Murray? I've arranged a new safe house, a proper apartment in the city, under a trust with 17 layers of insulation. Henrik will attend her full-time. She'll have security supplies and a direct line to Bruce. New identity, full papers. By the time the baby arrives, Merit Jernick will legally cease to exist. Karis thought about the woman in the other room, eating a granola bar in a bunker, carrying the last living piece of a man who had died to protect this empire. She thought about the promise Tavian had made to a dead man, and how that promise had nearly destroyed the two of them. You kept your word to Doran, Karis said quietly. I kept my word now. Keep one to me. Tavian looked at her, waiting. No more shadows, Tavian. No more parallel lives. No more safe houses I don't know about. No more pharmacy runs I have to decode from coat pocket receipts. If I'm carrying your child, if I'm standing beside you in this, then I'm standing in the light, not in the gap between your professional empire and your private silence in the room. At the table. Do you understand? The kitchenette was small enough that one step brought him directly in front of her. He rested his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs brushing the base of her neck. When I met you, Tavian said, his voice low and rough, I told you that you were the key to the only room in my mind that wasn't filled with violence. He paused. I was wrong. You're not the key to a room. You're the reason I want to rebuild the entire house. Karis searched his face. The mask was gone. The strategist, the crime lord, all of it had stepped aside, leaving only the raw, unfinished architecture of a man who was terrified of the very thing he wanted most, a family, a real one. You're going to be a terrible father, she said softly. You'll try to run background checks on kindergarten teachers. I'll run background checks on the kindergarten. You'll want to install surveillance in the nursery. I was thinking biometric locks. Tavian starting small. Just a camera. A tasteful one. She placed her hand against his chest, over his heart, feeling the steady, stubborn beat of it beneath his shirt. We need to pick a doctor, she said. A real one, not Henrik. Henrik is abort certified. A real one, Tavian, with a waiting room and magazines from this decade. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. The same spot. The same gesture, but it didn't feel mechanical anymore. It felt like a vow, pressed into her skin with the full, terrifying weight of everything he had never known how to say. From the other room, Mairead's voice carried softly through the doorway. Are you two going to stand there all morning, or is someone going to make me a cup of tea? The baby wants chamomile. Karis felt Tavian's chest hitch against her hand. A laugh, silent, shaking, genuine. Chamomile, he muttered against her hair. Of course, it's chamomile. Karis stepped back, squeezed his hand once, and walked into the other room to boil the kettle. Behind her, Tavian watched her go. The woman who had followed a $5 receipt into the dark and walked out carrying his entire future in her body. He picked up the burner phone. He had calls to make, borders to redraw. A war to finish. But first, he opened the cabinet above the stove and found the chamomile. Some debts, he was learning. You pay with tea? She didn't follow him because she was jealous. She followed him because she was about to become a mother. And mothers don't wait in towers for the truth to arrive. They hunt it down. What Karis Holm found at the end of that gravel road wasn't betrayal. It was a man trying to honor a dead friend's last wish while protecting a woman who couldn't protect herself. It was a secret, kept not out of cruelty, but out of a loyalty so deep it nearly cost him the only person who made his world worth defending. She carried his child. And in the end, she carried Tavian Korva, himself, out of the shadows and into a life he never believed he deserved. If this story gripped you by the throat and didn't let go, drop your favorite moment in the comments. Was it the pharmacy receipt, the cottage window, or the chamomile at the end? Share this with someone who loves a story where the quiet ones turn out to be the strongest. And I'll see you in the next one.